Stead, we're live.
And stepping into the batter's box, here you go. Mike Stenhouse, welcome to another edition of In the Dugout. Thanks to Larry, the Liberty guy, that epic voice that introduces our show every day. All right. Hey, here's a question for you. You don't hear every day. Should the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, ban sex? Seems pretty silly, but they just banned products that are designed to reduce the harmful impact of cigarettes. They just banned them because there might be something dangerous if they're used improperly. Just like there could be something dangerous with sex, I guess, if you don't do it or if you do it improperly. Well, we're going to ask that question with the president of the American Vapor Manufacturers Association coming up in about 15 to 20 minutes. You might not have known, but a whole class of harm reduction vaping products have been banned. First, I'm going to comment in just a moment on a terrific piece I saw yesterday called Planned Chaos. So I kind of modified it to my own, but you'll get it. Why is so much, this is not accidental, folks. Why is so much planned chaos going on around us? My thoughts and examples of that in a second. Then we'll close out the show. We kind of got 3 20-minute segments today. We'll close out the show with Dr. Andrew Boston. Hasn't been with us for a while. You know, we thought the COVID thing was going away, but it doesn't look like it's going away. Dr. Boston was banned from Twitter himself, and he's discovered a potential cover-up of a couple, 2 or 3 very serious vaccine impacts, adverse reactions at Brown University. The school apparently knowingly and purposely tried to cover up. So we'll talk to Andy Boston about that. First, just a few batting practice quick hits, if you would. First of all, you might have seen, this is actually good news, and I'll tell you why. So you remember the riots we had across the country? They're planning more Summer of Rage this year over the abortion. But in Providence, we had riots too. And one particular man was charged, he was prosecuted, and today he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for lighting a police cruiser on fire. Why is that important? You would think that's kind of normal. Well, things aren't normal in most of the country. The left, the BLM, the Antifas, the pro-abortion, they can riot, they can destroy property, they can harm people, even kill people, and often there's no prosecution, there's no consequence. And then you look today, you hear the story of a 69-year-old grandmother who attended January 6th protest, did enter the congressional building, did nothing but enter, 6 months in jail. Or 3 months in jail, whatever it was, 60 days in jail. But still, prosecutions are not automatic anymore, at least in Rhode Island. And I give the Attorney General's office credit here. We've been critical of that office. At least in Rhode Island, we're prosecuting, charging, and sentencing people. Now, here's a little follow-up on a story we covered yesterday as well. We talked about the one player on the Philadelphia Phillies who was going to miss time and pay and games in Toronto because he did not want a vaccine. He said, Canada's not going to tell me what I'm going to put or not put in my body. Well, it's catching on apparently. Now 10 members of the Kansas City Royals, including former Red Sox rookie sensation Andrew Benintendi, are going to miss the 3 or 4 game series in Toronto. They'll miss pay. They'll miss their service time, which accrues towards their pension and other benefits. It'll cost Benintendi about $186,000. But yet, people are starting to stand on principle. And this is what needs to happen here in Rhode Island and across America. It's time we quit worrying about jobs. There are plenty of jobs out there. It's easy for me to say, but still, it's time for people to stand on principle. There are things more important. I'm not downplaying the importance of a good job or paying a fine or whatever. But as we talked about with Nicole Solis last week, it doesn't hurt when the left criticizes you. It doesn't hurt. People are starting to stand up. They have had enough of the planned chaos, of which I'm going to talk about shortly. And I'm happy to see professional baseball players standing on principle. We had basketball players. Who was it? Was it Kyrie Irving, former Celtics, who refused to get a vaccine all year, couldn't play in certain home games or road games, but he said, hey, if that's the price I got to pay for standing on principle and having the right to control my own body, I respect him for that. All right, here's the last little quick hit we'll get into. Just breaking, apparently yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron suffered a major defeat. The conservatives and others did not allow, they defeated his motion to extend COVID passports for travel in that country. Even they, enough of this nonsense, enough of this pandemic, enough of this planned chaos. People have had it. We can only hope that people will pay the price at the election box this November. I've been talking a lot lately about truth versus untruth. How when the media, well, we started from a sermon, if you remember, that when we as children of God ignore the truth or put forth untruths, we sin. In a similar way, it's my commentary, my belief that when the media allows untruths to become the national narrative, when they ignore the real truths, the media has sinned against America, because it was there. They were born, they were created in the Constitution, in the First Amendment, with freedom of the press, with the understanding that they would be the guardians of truth. But when they become the purveyors of untruths, they have sinned against their creation. They have sinned against Americans. I saw a piece yesterday in a publication I'd never heard of before called The Advance. It's out of Georgia somewhere. Just so happens that I'm wearing my Savannah, Georgia hat today. Great town. My son has moved down within an hour of Savannah, so we've been there a lot in the last year. It's a fabulous town. And I saw this piece called Planned Chaos. So I took some liberties. A lot of what you're going to hear comes from that piece. Just want to give them proper credit. A lot of it comes from me. It's different. I've just modified it. But when I talk about planned chaos, I'm talking a lot more about just the pandemic, which all of you know about. You know, whether that was planned or not, with China, conspiracy, I don't know. A lot of people believe it. It's a credible theory, but I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what to believe these days? But it's much more than that. You know, there's an old saying, if you leave the barn door open, the horses will run off. Right? So if you intentionally leave the barn door open, then you must want the horses to run off. You can't blame that on stupidity or laziness or an accident. It was intentional. Similarly, if you leave the southern border door wide open, you get more drug trafficking and human trafficking. So if you intentionally leave the southern border door open, you must want more fentanyl and millions more illegal immigrants. Why? Why the planned chaos? When you continually make obviously inaccurate statements that everyone knows cannot be true, you look like a fool, especially when you do it publicly. So when a Berkeley law professor kept saying in a congressional hearing that men can become pregnant, and then labeled the senator who was asking honest questions that any of us would ask, and calling him the transphobic fool, thus lowering the IQ of the entire room, this woman must have wanted to look like a fool herself. Why? These things are true. There's an if, and then there's a then. If this, then that. It happens. If you cut police budgets and release criminals without bail, you will get more crime on the streets. So, if you intentionally cut police budgets and you release criminals without bail, you must want more crime on the streets. Why? Why the planned chaos? When you build high-density income housing projects for low-income residents in affluent communities, it brings in more traffic, drugs, and crime, and it lowers the value of private property in the neighboring areas. So in Charleston, Rhode Island tonight will pass an ordinance in Rhode Island tonight that will open the door to a high-density housing complex. They must purposely want to put their constituents at financial and physical risk. Why? Why the planned chaos? When US public health agencies don't follow the science and conscientious employees are threatened if they speak out, the public will get bad advice. And health risks may abound. So when the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, and other related health officials under political pressure use weak or flawed data to make critically important health, ostensibly to make critically important health decisions, in this case, in recommending COVID vaccinations for children, even babies, they are knowingly putting our kids and young adults and toddlers at risk. Why? Why the planned chaos? If a company traded on the stock exchanges engages in massive controversial activities, its stock will fall, and their once valued employees will flee the company. So when every Fortune 100 company has now adopted diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, they must want their stock to suffer and for their employees to depart. Why? If you try to raise taxes in the United States Congress or as the president, as your country is about to fall into a recession, it is true that the recession will become deeper than it otherwise would be. So when President Biden and congressional Democrats purposely seek to raise taxes by over $400 billion on small business S corporations and other pass-through income entities, that means they don't care about business and actually want a deeper recession. Why? Why the planned chaos? I got more. You ready? If you cut back on oil production, gas prices will go up because supply is down. So if you intentionally restrict or ban the production of domestic oil in our country, you must want gas prices to go up, and you must want to have to ask the Saudis to employ more of their people so America can buy more of their gas when we could do it all right here in our own country in a more environmentally safe way. Why? Why the planned chaos? If you print trillions of dollars without increasing the supply of goods, inflation will hit hard. It's an economic fact. It must happen. Economic is a science. This is a scientific fact. So if you intentionally print trillions of dollars, inject it via COVID relief funds into the market, into the country, and then you pay people not to work such that fewer goods are produced, then you must want inflation to hit hard and very hard. You must want it. It's a necessarily true if then this thing. Why? Why the planned chaos? So the question becomes, why do they want the planned chaos? Why do they want crisis? Why do they want riots? Why do they want conflict throughout the country? It's clear to me now that these and other problems we are experiencing are not an accident and are not due to incompetence. This is being done on purpose. This is planned chaos. Why? Many years ago, President Obama said that he wanted to take the US down a few notches on the world stage. I think it's got to be more than that. These people, these political supremacists who are running our country, they're not foolish or misguided people. They're very smart people. They know exactly what they're doing. The question is why? You know, in today's identity and victim politics world, if the tribal leaders on the left tell you to do something, you do it, even though that you know it will create what I'm calling here today planned chaos. You just do it because you follow your orders. That's all that matters to these political supremacists and their blind mice followers who don't know what they don't know or care about knowing. I call it negligent and willful ignorance. We'll keep looking into it. We'll keep asking these questions, but I got one more for you. When everyone knows that harm reduction products are safer to use than their more dangerous counterparts, the public is better off and people are more healthy when they choose those harm reduction products and use them as an alternative. But when the Biden administration, when its FDA, its Food and Drug Administration, bans a major class of harm reduction vaping products by the manufacturer Juul, J-U-U-L, wiping out up to 1,000 jobs, by the way, it must purposely want people to be less healthy. Why? Well, let's find out from our first guest. So we welcome, and I can see she's in the full spirit of In the Dugout, Amanda Wheeler. Amanda, welcome to In the Dugout.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And you are literally in the dugout. Look at you.
I am.
You know, we just started putting out that In the Dugout image. Well, I think with you were the first invitee. So you are the very first guest on this show to literally be in the dugout with me.
Well, I'm very happy to be in the dugout with you, and it's much more interesting than my boring office background.
Okay. Now you are a vaping shop owner, as I understand it, and manufacturer yourself. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. I've been in this business for about 11 years. My husband and I own a small business based out of Arizona.
All right. And you're also president of the American Vapor Manufacturers Association.
That's correct. Yeah, that's our association that we formed specifically to defend manufacturers of harm reduction products from malignant FDA actions.
And do you also get into trying to protect more localized retailers from harmful local actions? Or is it all national what you do?
Mostly federal. What we focus on, we have many sister organizations that are state-based that take on those state and local fights. And so we work to provide them resources to help them in those fights.
All right, great. That's a great, I got to say, Amanda, and I don't know if you agree, but I think this whole vaping issue, and it was before this whole notion of fake news and false narratives, kind of became popular. But we looked into this issue many, many years ago, working with some local vaping advocates and retailers and whatnot. And it seemed to us back then like this is one of the most misunderstood issues out there. The stories put forth by anti-vaporings, I don't even know who they are. They seem to come mostly from the left, but we don't have to say that. But the stories put forth and the media accounts are completely at odds with what I was told by these people I talked to in the vaping industry. So we're inviting you here today to try to clear up some of this, if that's okay. But do you agree that this is a very misunderstood issue?
It's an extremely misunderstood issue, and it's purposeful misinformation that's been disseminated to the public for years. And it's driven by Bloomberg Philanthropies and all of their front groups that they fund to spread this misinformation.
So Bloomberg, we know Bloomberg had a big success in winning some anti-Second Amendment legislation in this state. You're saying Michael Bloomberg is behind a lot of this anti-vaping stuff too?
Yeah, Bloomberg Philanthropies has a very large coalition of these sort of dark money, non-governmental organizations that they funnel over $200 million a year to. Those same groups are also funded by sales of cigarettes in this country. A large portion of the Master Settlement Agreement, which governs how tobacco taxes are spent, are funneled to these groups. And so they're very well funded. They spend a lot of time on public relations, media misinformation, all of those sorts of things.
I want to get to that media misinformation in a second, but I'll just have you know that, like I said, many years ago when we were, right now, our organization, our nonprofit is transitioning to becoming more of a public media entity. Back 5-6 years ago, we were a research and legislative advocacy organization, but that's pointless in our state. Like I said, they don't listen. Nobody cares what the research. Nobody cares what the truth is anymore. They follow the narratives, true or false. So, if you could, I don't. Well, let me first give the context of what we're doing here. This is a great article I read on the Daily Signal, "A Crown Jewel of Stupidity at the FDA" by this DeRoy Murder. You probably saw this story, I'm sure.
Yep.
First of all, before we get into the article, what is the false narrative that you believe is out there about vape products?
This harmful narrative that vaping is somehow physically harmful to people, that it's as harmful as cigarettes, that it's out there hurting people instead of helping people, that vaping exists solely to corrupt the youth and hook a new generation to tobacco. That's completely false. Vaping in the United States was really founded and expanded by small business owners like myself, who were searching for a way to quit smoking and finally found that in vaping products. And, we're talking about, 11 years ago when I started my business, these products weren't prevalent. We wanted to make these available to smokers in our community so that more people had the chance to get off of cigarettes and experience that quality of life increase that we had experienced. And so it's not really a big tobacco thing. It's something that a lot of small businesses in the US are involved in.
Let's talk turkey here. It is true. Now, we know that there's a hatred of big tobacco, right, among the left, right? We know that as a fact. It's my assumption that because big tobacco companies understood that people were going to be smoking fewer and fewer cigarettes and transitioning to products like vaping, less harmful products, because some of these big tobacco companies actually got involved in creating some of these vaping products, that all of vaping was like throwing out the baby with the bath, because they hated big tobacco, and big tobacco was involved in manufacturing and designing vaping products. We need to now hate all vaping products. I mean, I know that's oversimplified, but is there any truth to that?
That's very true. You know, for years, big tobacco wasn't in this space and you didn't hear those kinds of stories, but vaping became quite popular and big tobacco decided that it would be a smart move for them to make some investments in vapor products. And, you know, ever since then, it's been all downhill from there
Yeah, it
as
seems
far
like
as the
that's when the
public's
left, that
narrative.
seems like that's when the left went on the attack once the big tobacco companies got involved. All right. Again, I got to challenge some things because I don't understand some things. So I don't understand. I have to ask tough questions. And again, I'm hoping you'll clarify. As I understand it, big, Juul, other brand manufacturers, you mentioned they're not harmful to the body. It is true they don't have the carcinogens and those other harmful chemicals that cigarettes have, right? You agree with that?
I do agree with that.
It is true that they deliver nicotine, which is an addictive substance. Do you agree with that?
Yep.
All vaping products do, correct? Or most do, right?
Yeah, correct.
And I understand that Juul vaping products deliver more nicotine than other vaping and e-cigarette products. Is that also true?
There are many e-cigarette products that deliver just as much nicotine as Juul, but there's a variety, but yes.
All right. Now, isn't it also true that a lot of the, back when we were looking at this 4 or 5 years ago, even to the consternation, I mean, my board members who were believing all the, the misinformation hype, they really said, you got to get off of this topic. I said, no, wait a minute, there's a truth here. There seems to be a truth here. They were talking about I'm sure you remember that, every day you would hear just like so many other stories, the media would hype, this teenager dies in Chicago after vaping, this person, and 3 kids ended up in almost every one of those cases. In fact, I think in every one of those cases, they were using black market off the street vaping products, not Juul, not the ones by big brand manufacturers. What can you say about that?
That's 100% true. And I wish everyone were as well informed on that particular piece of information as you are. That was a coordinated effort to make it out like all of those injuries that were being seen were about nicotine vaping. Absolutely wasn't. It's like you said, it was about an additive that was being put into illegal cannabis products.
Yeah, or people would add products themselves, add additives themselves to it. They would put their own liquids in there or something like that to try to get a little extra something. And who knows what the hell was in those liquids, but yet the whole vaping industry was blamed for it. So it cut both ways. All right. So we know that the cancer causing carcinogens and chemicals in cigarettes are not in real brand vaping products. Nicotine. Talk to me about nicotine. It is addictive. What are the dangers of addiction to nicotine? Even though it's less dangerous than cigarettes, as you understand it, what are the dangers of nicotine addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. So nicotine, it's similar to, caffeine, alcohol, other types of substances that can be addictive that are commonly used by people because adults have the free choice to use them. Nicotine, I think, has a very bad reputation. There's a decent amount of research out there that shows that nicotine actually has some fairly positive effects as far as, Parkinson's disease, memory. It's been studied in people that have seizure disorders, that sort of thing.
Well, are you saying for the average person, a lot of nicotine in your system is harmless? Are you saying that?
I'm not saying it's entirely harmless. I think there's, it can certainly increase your blood pressure slightly after you use nicotine, other types of mild effects like that. Nothing on the spectrum that is, poses a significant risk to anyone that's in normal health.
Because other than flavored vapor, which is why I call it vaping, other than flavored vapor, nicotine is all the water vapor at that, right? It's harmless flavored water vapor. It's kind of like isn't it kind of like what's the thing, those machines you puff on
Oh, like a hookah? Is that what you're
yeah,
thinking?
hookah. I mean, is a hookah a form of vaping?
No, a hookah is not a form of vaping. I think there are some electronic hookahs, but a lot of hookah still actually burns tobacco.
Oh, that's right. It actually does burn tobacco. Okay,
Yeah.
you're right. So vaping's even safer than hookahs, right? Right, which are not banned at many establishments. We have hookah bars right up here in Providence, for crying out loud.
Yep.
Funny. All right. So put it together, the dangers, I mean, you call it harm reduction.
Mhm.
You're not saying they're harmless. You're saying that compared to cigarettes, vaping products are far less harmful. Is that the line?
Yeah, well, that's correct. And it's not me saying it. I mean, the entire country of England, they put out a study by the Royal College of Physicians, many years of examination of the research. They said that vaping is at least 95% less harmful than cigarette smoking. And they actually hand out vapes to people in hospitals that can't quit smoking by other means. And that's truly what it's meant for. It's meant for adults who smoke cigarettes who cannot quit by other methods, and it's proven wildly successful for that population.
All right, so given that fact, we know then that there is no, just like with, hey, my saying and not you, just like COVID vaccines, mask mandates, shutdowns, there was no scientific basis to do that. There's really no medical or scientific basis that vaping is harmful to adults. The whole issue now has become that big tobacco and the vaping industry is trying to hook kids on this product that is potentially dangerous to kids, that kids under 18 should not engage in this activity. And that's why I asked the question at the beginning of the show, and I'll ask it again here, not to you necessarily, but rhetorically, should the FDA ban sex? Hell, we don't want kids getting pregnant and have to get forced to go get an abortion or something, right? Or get an STD or whatever else, have these evil babies. I mean, what's the again, I'm not going to have you comment. It's my comment. To me, it's the same silly argument.
It is the same silly argument. And I think it really shows the hypocrisy involved in this. I mean, this is, there are other products that are meant for adults that we don't take away from law abiding adults because, some rebellious teens are experimenting with them. That's not a good way to govern the country. It's not a good way to regulate.
So when you look at this article, what did the FDA do exactly? They basically banned the manufacture and sale of virtually all of Juul's and only Juul's product line. Is that correct?
That is not correct. So this has
Okay.
been going on at FDA for about 2 years. FDA has now banned about 99% of the vapor products that applied applications with them. Juul is the one that grabs all the headlines because it's the name that everybody knows. But this has been going on for quite a long time. The FDA
Wow.
has banned millions of vapor products in this country.
It was the flavored vaping products that they banned?
Yeah, the flavors, for many different reasons.
So what is legal right now according to federal law? What kind of vaping products are allowed?
Well, that's complicated. There are about 55,000 products that haven't had their applications denied by FDA that are legal to be sold under FDA's enforcement discretion. There are several companies that sued FDA in federal court and had their FDA denials stayed. So those are still able to be sold. And so it's a mixed bag of things that FDA hasn't gotten around to yet and things from companies that have fought back against them in court. It's very hard to know, and it's a serious problem for retailers knowing what products are legal and which ones are illegal because FDA is not transparent in this process at all.
Do we live in a free society?
It's looking pretty grim these days. We should live in a free society.
I mean, if cigarettes aren't banned, it's. I mean, kids could smoke cigarettes too, right? It's stunning.
Yeah,
that we're allowing the more dangerous product to continue to be sold because it takes in so much money, tax revenue, but yet we're banning the less dangerous product. I mean, can you make any sense of it?
Well, I'll tell you how it's even more egregious. Last year, FDA actually approved a new kind of cigarette authorized to be sold in the market, and they approved it because it has less
a regular
nicotine.
Kind of tar and
it has all the same tar, all the same chemicals. It just has less nicotine, which is the one thing in a cigarette that won't kill you, right? There's FDA logic for you. So we're banning all the harm reduction products. Meanwhile, we're authorizing new cigarettes onto the market. It's
So
very
what's the politics? But why is this happening?
So there are a core group of Congress people, mostly from the left, that are heavily funded by Bloomberg's front groups, people like Senator Durbin, Rajna Krishnamurthy, Patty Murray, Diana DeGette out of
Well,
Colorado.
it's
The
about
list goes
campaign
on and on.
donation. It's
Yeah,
about being
absolutely.
bought and owned by Michael Bloomberg.
Absolutely. I mean, these people, they are all rabidly against any type of harm reduction products. And they've hauled FDA officials in front of their oversight committees and demanded that they clear the market of these products. They've written letters. They've had a media pressure campaign on the FDA. Now they're threatening to revoke the FDA commissioner's approval if he doesn't get in line with their marching orders. And meanwhile, the FDA is supposed to be, an independent agency, a part of the executive branch, and they're acting like Congress's personal errand boy right now.
Now, I remember watching because we had covered this product years prior. I remember watching during the Trump administration, maybe 3 years ago. There was a conference, whatever you want to call it. He had a bunch of vaping experts, advocates, and opponent and critics, together in a room. It looked like it was in a big table. And the media kind of broadcast. They were allowed in, and they broadcast the proceedings live. And I was impressed that I don't know if do you remember that? Do you remember when that happened? Yeah. Were you there? You might have even been there.
I was not in that meeting.
Okay.
No.
You certainly would have earned a seat there. But anyway, I was impressed at the openness of the debate. And I think because there was an open debate, it seemed, a lot of us thought the Trump administration was going to cave into the public narrative, the false narrative, and issue some restrictions. But as I recall, because information was debated openly, honestly, a lot of the truth got out. I don't think the Trump administration ended up doing much, did they? Or did they?
Yeah, well, they did a couple of things, but to be fair, I think what the Trump administration did was to try to strike a middle ground, to acknowledge concerns about young people that were using the products, but also acknowledging adults' rights, consumer rights, small business concerns, all of those sorts of things. So the actions that they took really were what I would consider reasonable and fair, as opposed to what we're seeing happen right now, where they're applying a sledgehammer to the situation.
Right. Yeah. And I do recall now, you're right. I was critical of the Trump administration for, they were playing politics and seeking a middle ground, because the science and the truth, would not lead one to believe, an open-minded person, an honest person, to lead to any kind of ban or prohibition. But yet they played politics and struck a middle ground. But Biden, they don't care about politics. They're just kind of, like you said, they're just kind of march as they would. All right, final area to cover with you. Now, I know the FDA is under pressure to go even further. They want to ban all flavored products under the guise that, well, it's the flavored products that youth and under 18-year-olds want more, the strawberry, whatever flavors, even the menthol, which apparently is popular among minority communities, but they're under pressure, right, to just pretty much wipe out the whole rest of your industry. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. Yeah, they're under enormous pressure. And, I'll tell you a funny anecdote. I saw a picture about a week or two ago of Biden's daughter on the beach with the first lady, and she had a jewel in her hand. And I thought, maybe you might want to have a conversation with your dad about what the FDA is doing there. It's ridiculous. Everybody knows somebody that's used these products to quit smoking. It's a hard truth to deny these days. And yet, still there's just this, almost rabid sort of mob mentality at play among certain quarters of politicians to just do away with it.
Final question. Let's talk about the human toll on this, not from a health perspective, not from a harm reduction, but from jobs and employment. With Juul, they employ about 1,000 people. Those could all be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any figures on how many jobs in the vaping industry have been lost in the last, let's say, half a dozen years since this craze hit, and how many more might be at risk?
Yeah, since 2000, 19, when all of that misinformation was going around and, things were looking pretty bleak, you had all of these state regulations come in, crazy governors putting out executive orders. That from 2018 until last year resulted in a loss of about 60,000 jobs and
Wow.
about 4,000 independent businesses. Right
Wow.
now, currently, there are still 10,000 independent businesses left that are at serious danger of being wiped out, about 120,000 jobs on the line, and $22 billion of annual economic impact. Everybody says inflation's out of control, we're coming up on a recession, and you've got this rogue administrative state trying to wipe out 120,000 jobs and 10,000 small businesses.
Well, like I said with the introduction, when you know that promoting dangerous products like cigarettes and banning less harmful products like vaping items is dangerous, and you do it anyway, you must want people to be less healthy, and I just don't understand why. Amanda Wheeler from the American Vapors Manufacturers, thank you for literally and thankfully joining us in the dugout. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Amanda Wheeler. All right, someone else who has been looking out for the public good, you know him. He's been a hero on this show. He has advised you properly all, for the 18 months that he's been with us during the pandemic. So we want to invite back and welcome back in the dugout, Dr. Andrew Bostom. Andy, if you will unmute yourself and turn on your video. There he is. He's back.
Okay, there we are. Can you hear me?
Wow. So I don't know if you want to make a quick comment on vaping. I know it's a little outside, but it's so, like she said, there's the FDA, and it's the same kind of scratch your head stuff we've been doing with the FDA on vaccines and maskings and the CDC. They're killing products that are less harmful than cigarettes, yet they're approving new cigarette products. It's really unimaginable.
No, I was actually I came in at the very tail end, and I was introduced to vaping as your guest indicated, as a bridge to getting people to stop smoking, or as one tool out there. It's very difficult. Nicotine addiction is pretty intense, but that's the only thing I knew about it until the recent hysteria, was that it was actually developed to help smokers, maybe lessen their habit and wean themselves off. So I don't know.
All right. Well, but it's the same, it's the same thing we've been talking about. We just cannot believe what the CDC, the FDA, NIH are doing. We'll get to that in a second, but a couple of major issues you're involved with. So you have joined the club, not our club yet, but you have been banned from Twitter. What happened?
Oh yeah, so and there's developments happening as we speak. So I simply tweeted out an Israeli study of semen donors that was published in a peer-reviewed journal called Andrology, and it showed that acutely after being vaccinated, these sperm donors, which is the right population to study for this issue, when followed serially, were having declines some weeks and then some months after they were vaccinated in their sperm counts. And by 5 months, it looked as if there was some rebound, and they were back to at 5 months where the difference between. So
you tweeted it out that the vaccine.
Mike, I literally tweeted the title of the study and asked the question, what happens with boosters? Does the same cycle repeat itself? That was it. That's the whole tweet.
And for that, you violated.
For that, I was permanently suspended.
Permanently suspended. Now,
and I appealed, and I still haven't heard anything about the appeal. So now I'm involved with actually Alex Berenson's lawyer.
Right, and we know he got it. We know he got his account back. Of course, he's got a big, huge international profile. But Andy, all through the pandemic, you were tweeting stuff much more counter narrative than that. What do you think? Why now, and why that story? I mean,
I think it had to do with the story we're going to talk about, and or things like that. Just getting entangled with both locally with our Department of Health, as you've chronicled here through the lawsuits, and also with the dean of the School of Public Health, who's now doubling as the COVID advisor. That within 12 hours of getting suspended, I had tweeted about the fact that Dr. McDonald was going to be deposed because I was on the Zoom call where that was announced basically by Judge
That was
Lanphier.
part of the Parents United, school mask mandate lawsuit, right?
Exactly. I just named the people that were going to be deposed. McDonald and.
But what about Brown? What happened there?
And then with Ashish Shah, the same day, I tweeted. I learned of an interview that he had given literally from the White House lawn. It was on June 20th, and I guess the tweet went out the 21st or 22nd, something like that. He said that there had not been any serious adverse events from the vaccines, from the COVID vaccines, any. And I said, this is an unacceptable statement.
At Brown or anywhere?
Anywhere. There had not been any. He said there had not been any adverse events associated with the COVID vaccine.
Despite the tens of thousands listed
from the White House
its own adverse database.
From the White House lawn on national television, national morning televisions on CBS
That's
News. Unbelievable,
Andy.
Right. So and the tweet that I put out was mild. I just said this is an unwarranted statement. And
this is Dr. Ashish Shah.
And I simply said there have been serious and even fatal adverse events associated with the vaccine from myopericarditis and from vaccine-induced thrombosis and thrombocytopenia. I said just those two alone, would.
And there was all right. That's true. And there was one particular incident at Brown. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So real quick, Mike, because I know we're limited. I was having a conversation with an old colleague I hadn't been in touch with for years, and he's now being interviewed, and grudgingly he doesn't want to come forward yet, but so I can't reveal his name either. But he is all I can say is he's a retired cardiologist now, and I had gotten a Twitter mail from one of his patients that he had suffered the same fate as Steve Scoley, basically, that he had refused to get vaccinated, and that his practice or his license was in jeopardy, et cetera. And that turned out to be a completely bogus story, but that was the purpose of the phone call. And then we got into exchanging what we'd been doing over the years. And I at about 20 minutes into the conversation, I mentioned the work that I was doing as an expert witness with the families and the issue also that I've been delving with in some cases with vaccines. And I just said, it's such a mild disease in children that I'm very much opposed to mandating vaccines in children. And somehow, Mike, that opened up the floodgates from a guy who, by the way, is very pro-vaccine, but something was bothering him because.
So what did we learn about this Brown student?
Yeah, so what I learned was that even though this guy, was covering minimally at the Miriam Hospital, he put in his sporadic coverage, he had seen 3 cases of vaccine-induced myocarditis, and then the conversation drifted, and then he went back to it about 2 minutes later. He riveted on this case of a Brown student who apparently was volunteering at the Miriam Hospital in March of 2021 and had a rip-roaring case of myopericarditis. And he had overseen his care, at least a little bit, for about a day. And he mentioned some other details about the case, all de-identified information. I mean, nothing HIPAA violation. And it took me a while to process the conversation. And then I realized, I emailed him and he gave me a couple of more details that were of use, but basically indicated he didn't want any involvement. And I said, well, now what am I going to do? I went back to the VAERS system because of some unusual timing.
The online database, the government's online.
I clearly found something that matched up with what he had given me.
So you think you found that case being reported on VAERS,
And then I wanted further validation, and I worked for like an entire weekend. It's not easy to do with the 2021 hospitalization database that I had purchased, which the center has now uploaded. And I worked with the data analyst. It took us the entire weekend, and also Todd Kenyon helped, the guy you've interviewed. He's a PhD scientist. We found the single case, hospitalization case, which also matched details, including the fact that my informant had said the family came from the South, and it gave us the name of the hospital, and it matched up to the Myriad.
All right. So the issue is, we know, I mean, you have been telling us for a year and a half that there were these thousands of these cases across the country and across the world.
Mike Bear says as of the date that Ashish Shah said there was nothing going on, there were 2,800 just mild pericarditis cases in people under 40 in the United States.
Just in that narrow segment. So,
exactly.
but we know those existed. The scandal here is it appears as if Brown University and Ashish Shah tried to cover it up.
Well, I don't know about Jah's role in this, but so to follow up, Mike, and now I think a couple of investigative journalists are following this. None from the state, unfortunately. One from the Epic Times, one from Just the News. What happened was I have a dear friend whose kid goes to Brown, and she'd been in contact over the years since COVID with President Paxson, trying to question certain policies, gently, et cetera, et cetera. Wrote a letter, basically summarized some of the evidence that I had uncovered, and asked about, had there been COVID hospitalizations related to COVID, prior to the vaccine policy, how many were there? And then had there been, he brought up this case, had there been others that related to the vaccine? Just got this icy, detached response. And this is not only a parent she's a graduate, she's also a donor to Brown University. And it was just, I was aghast, but she also didn't want to go public, at least so far. Since this has happened, my write-up was published at the Brownstone Institute. And then in follow-up to that, a group called No College Mandates.
Yeah, here's the letter you wrote. Yep.
Yeah, they've sent this out to the Ivy League. And that drew a response, Mike, which I'm supposedly going to investigate further tonight, tomorrow. Apparently, there were 2 rugby players at Brown. Now, this didn't happen, while they were in school. It happened about 8 months after they graduated. But they were Brown rugby players who got boosted, and they too had myocarditis, is what's being reported to me. So I'm going to follow up on that. But the point is that the real issue is Brown knew about this in March. The young man was hospitalized in March of 2021. They really didn't get going with their very aggressive vaccine policy on campus for students until May. They had their first drive in mid-May. And then by the first week of July, they had already vaccinated about 78% of the students. But the point was, at no time till now have they revealed this case, and at no time have they put it into their risk-benefit equation for students.
So what are their responsibilities here ethically here, right? What are their responsibilities?
I think ethically what they could have done in a very unique way, because they got such an early warning signal, is they could have said, okay, pause. Here it is. Instead of announcing their vaccine policy in April that they were pushing for the summer, that everyone was going to have to be vaccinated by August 1st, they could have said, okay, wait, we've had this case. We're going to discuss it anonymously in the community. We're going to say, on the one hand, we've had this case of myopericarditis in one of your companion students. However, if this were true, say, for example, Mike, till now, before the availability of the vaccines, or just as they're becoming available, we've had XYZ kids on campus who are also not going to tell you their names, who have been hospitalized with COVID pneumonia. Now, therefore, even though we had this tragic case of a vaccine injury, we think the benefit outweighs the risk, because we had several kids hospitalized with COVID pneumonia. The fact is, Mike, that they almost definitely have had 0 kids hospitalized with COVID pneumonia. So they can't make that argument. Now, I looked at the State University of New York website, which is the only really transparent website that I'm aware of. There may be a couple of others. They have 326,000 undergraduates in the SUNY system. They have had 0 hospitalizations from COVID. Okay, so Brown's only got about 8,000 undergraduates. The likelihood.
So again, it's the question: what's more at risk to these young people, the COVID or the COVID vaccine?
And that should have been that this case, had they handled it properly, would have triggered that internal discussion. You and I wouldn't have been privy to it. No one needed.
Isn't that an honest question that any medical professional should honestly ask?
Absolutely, absolutely. But you know, Brown is not uniquely guilty of this. When you look at the demographic of this particular vaccine injury, the myopericarditis, it is really concentrated wherever it's been looked for in 18 to 24-year-old men in particular, healthy men. So this is an issue for campuses across the country. It absolutely must be.
All right. Please follow up. We'll get you back on when you get some more info on all this. We want to follow up. We got about 5 minutes left. I want to bring up a couple other quick topics with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
For much of our conversation, you know, when we last had you regularly on, the issue was the younger and younger ages at which vaccines and boosters were being approved by the FDA. And you had just broached the topic, which is now widely known. Again, you were always months and months ahead of the curve with what you told us and our viewers. But you had broached the topic that the data sets, the quality, the depth of the research that they're making these recommendations on for these vaccines for what is now up to 6 months.
6 months, right?
Down to 6 months and older, was not sufficient, was not even close to being sufficient, that they were making decisions on the important question we just asked: what's more at risk to a young toddler or infant? Is it the COVID or the COVID vaccine? They refused to do the requisite research, yet they cavalierly made the recommendation. So the question is there anything you have seen since then that would change your opinion that parents do not have your toddlers, your babies, or your young children vaccinated, no matter what happened, no matter what schools or other things might demand this coming fall?
The opposite is true. If you look at this less than 5 years old to down to 6 months data that were presented and for some godforsaken reason approved, you would see, first of all, they didn't even meet the basic threshold of short-term efficacy. They're supposed to prevent 50%, reduce the infection rate by 50%.
So that advice is still clear, right? It's stronger than ever.
It was less than half of that. Okay. They maybe prevented 25% of the infections in the short term, and there were actually more hospitalizations in the vaccinated group.
And that's where I want to go to next. Overall, now I've been seeing headlines, but I know not to trust headlines from anybody, the left or the right. So I go to Andy Boston. I've been seeing many headlines that are now saying this is a pandemic of the vaccinated. If for some reason the vaccine is making spread amongst other vaccinated more likely, more prevalent, and the vaccines are actually having a negative impact on society.
Mike,
where are you on that?
Yeah, that's been clear for a while, that in terms of certainly infection rates, you're seeing you're in the domain, certainly after the primary vaccination series, maybe even after the first booster now, you're in the domain of negative vaccine efficacy within a couple of months.
That's among all age groups, right?
Yeah, overall. So more infections in per capita in people that are vaccinated versus not vaccinated. And it gets back to the theme that we've had.
Do you want to give a medical reason why that might be the case?
Yeah, it could be because of the limited immunity afforded by the vaccine. There's something called original antigenic sin, and the immunity is very focused and limited. And now we're 4, 5, 6, 7 variants beyond what the design of the original vaccine, which is still being administered. And they're talking about Omicron specific vaccines now, but they too still give a limited type of immunity, which is easily evaded. And so the people are really going to be protected from serious outcomes. There's great data now from Qatar. They're going to be protected from serious outcomes by having a prior infection from any variant. That reduces
we were right all along.
97%.
we're not going to
97%
we're not going to reach herd immunity until we get more cases of natural immunity, right?
Well,
I mean,
it's not a question. We're probably at herd immunity in a lot of ways, because herd immunity, if you go all the way back to our earliest discussions, is really best defined by keeping people out of the hospital en masse, and
right.
we're at that point. We're at that point.
All right. Speaking of immunity, we're going to go a couple minutes long here, but I want to get these last two quickly. Speaking of immunity, not only, let's go back to advice on children with the vaccine. Not only is it ineffective, the vaccines on the younger and younger and younger, not only could there be some again, small risk, but some risk of an immediate adverse impact. But I've been seeing headline after headline that's saying that the COVID vaccines and the boosters in very, very young children are actually destroying their immune systems in the mid and long term. Where do you come down on that?
I don't know if we have enough data, to say that. But the bottom line is, let's go back to basic principles. Again, and we've said this ad nauseum on your show, unless you have a child that has had a predisposition to previous pneumonias, whether they're bacterial or viral, like they have cystic fibrosis, perhaps they have developmental issues where they've been in and out of the hospital with pneumonias. It's very hard to define a subset of children that would benefit at all from this vaccine. It's such a mild disease in children.
All right, changing gears totally. Monkeypox. They're starting
4 cases in Rhode Island, Mike. I just got an advisory from the Department of Health.
And I believe you had just touched upon this the last time we spoke to you a few months ago. We're starting to see some hysteria. We're starting to see, there was look at this headline right here. I don't know if you saw this particular headline, but in New York City, because of the hysteria created again, because of the hysteria created by the media, everybody wants a monkeypox vaccine and they don't have enough in New York City.
Everybody, it's a very targeted disease, without being accused
sexually
of any
transmitted, right, in the gay communities, right?
Sexually transmitted in the gay communities is where it's been overwhelmingly, and the big clusters.
Nobody will say that. You can't say that.
The big clusters of cases came out of these gay bacchanalia that they had in Europe, particularly in Belgium. So contacts with people who've come from those, obviously, could spread it around, but it's limited. And even in the gay population, it's a real risk benefit that you'd have to calculate for yourself to get the smallpox vaccine, which has its own toxicity profile.
Yeah,
by
fever,
the way,
body
including mild
chills, and
pericarditis,
fatigue.
Mike.
People aren't dying from monkeypox, right? It's just got this bad sounding name like Planet of the Apes or something.
In Africa, it depends. Some of the variants in Africa have been they can be lethal. Nothing like smallpox itself, but on that spectrum. But no, it's true that the variant that's escaped out of, I think it was West Africa to Europe, is milder, but I think there's been a few fatalities. I don't know of any from this current outbreak, though. Historically, there have.
But again, overhyped, right? Overhyped.
But the point is, the smallpox vaccine really should be, by and large, limited to smallpox itself, or the severe strains of monkeypox, because it's no picnic, the smallpox vaccine.
All right. Andy, terrific to get your sage advice once again. Thanks for joining us back here and in the dugout. We'll be in touch soon.
Take care. Bye-bye, Mike.
Folks, Dr. Andrew Boston. Listen, because of Dr. Boston, this show was the only place you could go in Rhode Island and get the truth about all these pandemic regulations and mandates, masking, vaccines, lockdowns, testing, you name it. What was said at the time first on this show was controversial. We were criticized. We were ridiculed. Dr. Boston was ridiculed by many radio hosts. Everything he said, everything we told you and talked about is now accepted fact. That's why you watch this show. That's why you tune into the Ocean State Current. And that's why you'll be back and join us next week when we continue our podcast. So Thanks for joining us today for In the Dugout. Mike Steno's out. We'll see you next game next week.